Okay. Okay. So thank you all so much for coming today to our highly unique program, the Venus Flytrap DIY. We're so fortunate to have with us today Tad Adams, who grew up in Western North Carolina, graduated from Hickory High School, went to NC State, studied entomology, zoology. He pursued commercial beekeeping at Ohio State University. He was running a successful commercial bee operation when he decided to go back to school and went to UNC Chapel Hill and got a doctorate in pharmacy. He has run a hospital pharmacy, but has always been interested in, or developed, I should say, an interest in carnivorous plants. And that is what we're talking about today, which, you know, it's a really unique opportunity to learn about something that, well, most of us have probably not had like a whole lot of experience with. Tad also earned his Master Gardener at Catawba County Extension Service in 2019. So that's a nice fresh refresher there. But he's obviously is highly qualified on this subject. He owns a number of, well, many carnivorous plants himself, and just knows an awful lot about Venus flytraps and other similar plants. So without any further ado, Tad, I'm going to turn this over to you. And when you are ready to have the slides up, you just let me know and we'll go to the slides.
Okay, that sounds good. We can go ahead and put the first slide up if you'd like.
Okay.
Which is the title slide.
Are you seeing that?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, and I'll talk while Eric is getting that set up. I'll talk just a little bit and give you my history with the Venus flytrap. I got my first flytrap, believe it or not, over 50 years ago, and got it for my birthday. I read all the directions. You know, we didn't have the internet back then, so I really didn't know what to do other than what it told me to do. And it said that I was supposed to keep a plastic dome over it at all times, that I was supposed to keep it in the sunshine. So you can imagine that pretty much created a little heater that pretty much burned it up. And it said it was okay to feed it hamburger. So yeah, every once in a while when mom was cooking a hamburger, I'd sneak over and get a little piece of raw hamburger and put it in the trap and watch it close. And so every year for my birthday, I got a new Venus flytrap because they only lasted about a year. So in the last, probably 3 or 4 years ago, I was at the beach and I hadn't had a flytrap for a long time. And I saw one and I said, hey, I'm going to try these again. And then with the internet and all the information that's out now, and I suspect we've learned a lot about Venus flytraps in the last 50 years. I've been pretty successful in being able to keep them alive now. So I wanted to share some of those tips and things that I've learned with you today, and also talk about some of the other carnivorous plants that are around to kind of put the Venus flytrap in perspective, so you can kind of see how it fits in the plant world. So this is the first slide here of the plant. This is a single Venus flytrap. This is what one little Venus flytrap looks like. And if you were fortunate enough to get one from the library, there's probably similar to this. This may have a few more leaves. This is a rosette type plant, which means everything grows from the center. You can see the leaves with the little traps on the end, and the leaves are actually the traps themselves. The thing that actually looks like a leaf that comes out from the center of the plant that goes to the trap is the stem of the plant. It's actually what we call the petiole. And so that's what holds the leaf on, and the leaf is the trap. And if you can see in this plant, there's a little flower getting ready to come up in the very middle of the plant. So when these plants flower, they flower from that center. So that's the typical Venus flytrap you see there. We go to the next slide. The next slide is going to show you Venus flytrap in its natural habitat. I'd always wanted to see a Venus flytrap. And a few years ago, I was down at the Green Swamp in North Carolina. And you may or may not know, but all Venus flytraps in the world grow within about 100 miles of the Cape Fear River near Wilmington. They're only found in North and South Carolina. So the Venus flytrap is the only flytrap in it's the only species, in the flytrap family. It's the only one. And you can see here in the wild that looks like it's growing pretty much in a field. And I was kind of surprised. I like to keep mine wet, sitting in water and damp, and I picture them in bogs and swamps. But they were actually growing out what kind of looked like a lawn. But if you dig down in that soil just a little bit, it's always wet. The flytrap always has to be stay in a wet environment. So that's just to let you see that those are in the wild, and they're only found in North Carolina. So we're fortunate to have such a unique plant that close to us. And we go to the next slide. I mentioned this program is about carnivorous plants, and the Venus flytrap is one of those. The Venus flytrap is probably one of the most famous plants in the world, if not the most famous plant. And when we talk about carnivorous plants, what that means is plants that eat meat. So the Venus flytrap was the first plant that anybody ever realized caught insects to use them for food. And that happened in the 1700s. It was actually the first governor of North Carolina that got a flytrap, and he was able to send it across to England, and they studied it, and they knew it caught flies. They didn't really know why. And they were able to figure out that it actually was able to digest the flies and use it for food. So we can go to the next slide. There's about 600 species of carnivorous plants, 600 species in the world that consume insects for food. And this is the leaf, the trap, and I know that's blurry, but what I wanted you to see on this picture is just what the leaf looks like, what the trap of the flytrap looks like itself. And I want you to pay particular attention to the 3 little white lines on both sides. And those are little trigger hairs. And the way the flytrap knows that it's got food to eat is something has to touch 2 of those trigger hairs within about a 10-second period of time. So if a little ant walks in here and he hits the trigger hair, but he ends up walking out on the other side and doesn't hit anything else, it's not going to close. But if he goes in and hits 2 of these hairs, or if a big fly or a moth or something comes and lands in the trap and touches 2 of these at the same time, that causes the trap to close. And just real quickly, I don't want to detail, but what that does when those little trigger hairs get bent, it causes electricity to run through the plant. And when that electricity hits that little green line down the middle, that's the hinge or the midpoint of the trap. Those cells fill up with water, and that sudden influx of water into those cells causes them to get bigger and causes the trap to snap shut and capture the insect. And that all happens in about a 1/10 of a second. And I want to do a live demonstration now if we can. I've got a fly here. I want to try to feed a fly trap just so everybody can see what that looks like. And my cameraman's going to come up and assist me with this. So April, if you'll tell me when you're ready.
Oh, I'm ready.
We'll attempt to feed this fly trap here. And I'm going to ask April to go ahead and focus down on that trap and get as close as she can and focus. And then I'm going to give it this fly.
Okay.
You ready to go? Okay, so that fly's got to hit 2 of those trigger hairs before the trap's going to close. And everybody just got to see that fly trap eat a fly. Everybody see that? That went way too easy. I thought we were going to lose that fly, and I was going to have April mad at me for letting the fly out in the library. Okay, we can go back to the slides now. And we can go to the next slide. All right, this is a fly trap out in nature. And what I wanted you to see on here was the flower stalk that's starting to coming up on this fly trap. And fly traps, the Venus flytrap reproduces by flowering and producing seed. And then those seed are dispersed and they can start new Venus flytraps. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the flowers and the stalks later. If I could have the next slide. I just wanted to show what a Venus flytrap looks like in bloom, and it creates this cluster of flowers. And you notice how long the flower stalk is and how high the flowers are above the Venus flytrap. We think that's to keep the flytrap, when the little insects come to pollinate it, bees and wasps, to pollinate those flowers, the Venus flytrap doesn't want them to get eaten. So it keeps the flower really far away from the traps to make sure it gets pollinated and can produce seed and not have those pollinators eaten by the trap. And next slide. And this is a Venus flytrap. You can see the trap there. Now you know about the size of the trap. If you look right below it, you'll see a little baby Venus flytrap that's probably about 2 months old, 6 to 8 weeks old. And that's a little flytrap that's growing from the seed. And I think the next slide shows that just a little bit closer, so you can see that little baby flytrap there in the bottom left corner. And that's you could cover that with a dime. You could put a dime over that and hide it. So it's really small. Okay, the next slide. And this is a big pot of Venus flytraps. This started as one Venus flytrap, and now I'm guessing there's probably about 25 to 30 Venus flytraps in here, because Venus flytraps can also reproduce by rhizomes. They produce an underground stem, and that stem can start a new plant. So they don't have to reproduce by seeds. They can also reproduce by spreading out. And this they can do especially when they've had plenty to eat. So if they're getting a lot of flies and they're eating a lot of stuff, then that causes the plant to spread out and produce a lot more flytraps. All right, next slide. And now I just want to show you just some of the other types of carnivorous plants. Again, these are plants that use insects for food. The thing they have in common is they all grow in really poor soil where there's not a lot of nitrogen in the soil. And if you garden or you farm or you have houseplants, you probably know that you put fertilizer on them. And one of the key ingredients to fertilizer is nitrogen. Well, most of these carnivorous plants live in swamps or bogs where the water is continuously washing through the soil and it washes away all the nitrogen, all the minerals. So they don't really have much that they can get. Their roots are usually not very well developed because they don't pull up any food through their roots. They actually rely on these insects to get their nitrogen. This is another picture from the green swamp in North Carolina. So this is a native carnivorous plant that we also have that grows right near the Venus flytrap. And this is called an American pitcher plant or tall pitcher plant, or sometimes you'll hear them called trumpet plants. And these only are found in North America. They mostly grow along the coast of the United States, along the Gulf Coast and around northern Florida, up the eastern North Carolina and up into Virginia a little bit. And these trumpet plants fill up with water. They create a lot of digestive fluids, and they're attractive to insects that fly down into the trumpets, down into that pitcher, and they drown and they can't get back out and they get digested. So just like the Venus flytrap that produces digestive fluids to digest the flies it catches, this pitcher plant produces digestive enzymes to digest the insects and things that it catches. And these can get to be about 34 feet tall. They can actually be pretty tall. And next slide. This is another type of tall pitcher plant. There's 7 species of pitcher plants that are found in North America. The purple pitcher plant is a little bit different than the other pitcher plants because it only relies on water to trap insects. It doesn't have a lid or cover like most of the other pitcher plants. So it opens up, and when it rains, the little pitchers fill up with water, and insects come along and they fall in and they can't get out, they drown. And they don't really have really strong digestive enzymes, and because there's so much water in the pitchers, it would get so diluted it really wouldn't digest the flies. So they really rely on bacteria to break down the insects for them to digest and use for food. The purple pitcher plant is native to North Carolina. It's found down in the coast, and this is the only pitcher plant that we have actually in the mountains in North Carolina. This one you can find up in the mountains. It tolerates cold really well. And it actually grows up into the United States, into Michigan, Wisconsin. So it's a very cold hardy pitcher plant. And next slide. pitcher plants hybridize really easily. They can, even though there's 7 species, they can all cross with each other and become different plants. And this happens in nature. So in nature, typically the different species bloom at different times so that they don't cross and the species stay unique. But man, we hybridize these pitcher plants all the time, and there's probably hundreds and hundreds of different types of pitcher plants. This is my favorite hybrid. It's called the Scarlet Bell, and it's a cross between the parrot pitcher plant and the sweet pitcher plant, which are just 2 of the types of the tall American pitcher plants. Okay, next slide. I see a question hop up, and I'll go ahead and just address that as I saw it. It said, are any of these that can handle drier climates? The tall American pitcher plants have to be in water. They like lots of water. The Venus flytrap has to be kept damp all the time. But there are some carnivorous plants and that will tolerate drier climates. And in fact, some, their roots will rot if they stay too wet. There's one we're going to look at here just in a minute called the Australian pitcher plant. And it has to dry out periodically or its roots will rot. So there are some that can be drier. This is another type of pitcher plant not found in North America. This is the tropical pitcher plant, and it grows in trees in mostly Southeast Asia. Philippines is a place where a lot of these grow. They grow up in trees, and you can see the pictures hanging down. And Erica, if you go to the next slide, I've got a little closer look at these pictures. And if, these pictures are beautiful, and there's all different species of these pitcher plants. Some of these are small. There's pictures on some of these plants that are as big as a gallon. They can hold a gallon of water in them. In fact, these plants, sometimes they've been found with rats drowned in them. So this is a carnivorous plant that actually eats something besides insects, rodents and small mammals. But they don't like to stay real wet. They need to be moist all the time, but they're sort of like orchids. You can grow them and keep them damp, but they like hanging baskets, and they don't like to sit in water at all. Okay, next slide. And this is the Australian. It's only found on the west coast of Australia in a small area. So this is kind of like the Venus flytrap for North Carolina in Australia. It's only found in this one small area. It's the only plant in its species. And these little pictures here that you're looking at are smaller than your thumb. They're little tiny pictures. So these things only usually eat little tiny ants and things. But they grow on the coastal regions, but they usually grow up on rocks where there's a lot of fog and mist in the air, but they don't like to sit in water. And if you have these, you've got to let them dry out. You usually water them and let the water totally evaporate. And then once they dry out, you can add water back. But they capture food pretty much the same as all the other pitcher plants by creating digestive enzymes that digest anything that falls in these traps. Okay, next slide. This is another carnivorous type plant that's found in North Carolina. This is a sundew plant. This is a capillary sundew, and sundews are found all over the world. I said there's about 600 species of carnivorous plants. About 150 of those 600 species are types of sundews. So these are found all over the world. And sundews have a wide variation in the way they need to be taken care of. This in North Carolina here are treated pretty much like the Venus flytrap. And next slide. This is a Cape sundew. So this sundew is only found in the Cape of South Africa. And it lives where it's hot all the time. It likes sitting in water. But this is mainly just to show you sundews. If you look at the little hairs that grow out on the leaves of the sundew plant, you can see those little drops of glue that it forms. And insects come in and get stuck on those little drops of glue. And then within a few days, the leaves start producing digestive enzymes and they consume those insects. So, all carnivorous plants except for the Venus flytrap either use water or glue or something sticky to capture their prey. The Venus flytrap is the only one that actually has a trap that just closes and grabs something. All right, next slide. The sundews are really good houseplant to have if you want, once you get ready to move on from the Venus flytrap. That Cape sundew you just saw a picture of is one of the easiest types of carnivorous plants to keep in your house. These are butterworts. Your wart is just an old term for plant, so W-O-R-T, wart. And they call them butterworts because they have leaves that get really greasy and they're really attracted to insects. And the insects come and land on those leaves, they're stuck there. And again, the plant's leaves start putting out digestive enzymes that break down those insects and turn that into food for the plant. And you can see this little field with butterworts in bloom. And if we go to the next slide, this next slide is a picture of a butterwort that's common, found in North Carolina. These are found all up the east coast of the United States. And they produce, you can see that little flower stalk coming up in the center there. It puts out a really nice little purple flower in the spring. All right, and the butterwort gets treated pretty much like the Venus flytrap. And this is the last type of carnivorous plant that I want to show you. And this is a cup that I keep full of bladderworts. So bladderworts are the most common type of carnivorous plant. About a third of all carnivorous plants are bladderworts, and these are found all over the world. They're found in water. They can be found in ponds. They can be found in bogs, in marshes, in real swampy areas. But these also can be found in trees, like those tropical pitcher plants we saw. They can grow in trees, and they have some of the most beautiful flowers in the world that will rival any orchid that you've seen. But the bladderwort catches its food. It has little bladders, like little balloons under the soil or under the water. And when an insect or anything gets close to those little balloons, it opens up and it sucks it up into the little bladders or into those little balloons. And it then digests those and uses them for food. Okay, so the next slide, we're going to get back to the Venus flytrap and spend the rest of our program talking about the Venus flytrap. And you can go ahead to the next slide. And there's really 5 main keys to taking care of a Venus flytrap. It's really important: the water, the sunlight that it gets, the type of soil that you use, nitrogen, which we'll talk more specifics about that. And then the other key that I didn't know about until I started keeping them again 3 or 4 years ago is the requirement of a winter dormancy period. And we'll talk a little bit about how you do that. So we're going to go through these one by one and help you take care of the Venus flytraps that you may have just gotten. So first thing we're going to talk about is water. Venus flytrap, it grows in swampy, boggy areas, and it needs to stay wet all the time. So if you go to the next slide, we know Venus flytraps don't like to dry out. So it's one of the carnivorous plants that needs to sit in a little tray of water at all times. And you can see here the water tray. It doesn't like to be waterlogged. The pitcher, American pitcher plants, you can fill them all the way to the top with water, and they do just fine. But the Venus flytrap really doesn't like to have all of its roots sitting in water. So if you keep the water level about 1/5 of the way up the pot, so let's say this little pot's 5 inches tall, then if you keep the water up about 1 inch at the bottom, that's perfect for the Venus flytrap. And we're going to talk about the soil type, but the peat that we use in the pot for soil is like a sponge, and it will draw the water up and keep the plant wet. So always important that your Venus flytrap sits in a little dish of water at all times, but not all the way to the top rim of the pot. And while we're talking about it, the best pots for Venus flytraps are plastic pots or glazed pots. You don't want to use a clay pot or anything that might leach any kind of minerals into the soil around the flytrap, because that's poison. If Venus flytraps, any kind of mineral, nitrogen, those types of things are poison to the flytrap. So you want to make sure any kind of pot you put it in isn't going to put any types of minerals or anything into the soil around the flytrap. And next slide. For the water that you use, you want to always use distilled water or rainwater, which are waters that don't have minerals or anything in them. You can go to the grocery store, you can buy distilled water. It's not real expensive, but you have to be careful and not buy mineral water or spring water drinking water, most of those have minerals added to make them taste better. And most people buy spring water because it tastes good, and they usually choose the springs that it comes from based on the minerals that those springs have in them. So distilled water is pure water with no minerals or anything whatsoever. So that's the best thing to put your fly traps in. And next slide. This is, I use a lot of rainwater for myself, and I've got a rain barrel, which is great. But rainwater is easy to collect if it's getting ready to rain, especially some of these big rainstorms like we've had lately. If you set out a pan or a 5-gallon bucket, you can fill up a bucket of water, rainwater in no time, and just keep you an old milk jug and pour it in there, and you can probably keep you a gallon of water around just about all the time. So rainwater is another alternative to distilled water. You could get by with tap water in an emergency. You don't want to let your fly traps ever dry out. So, if you're in an emergency and you have to put tap water on it, there's going to be a small amount of mineral in there. But then the next time when you water it, you want to water it from the top with either rainwater or distilled to wash out any of those minerals that it might pick up. All right, next slide. Next, we're going to talk about the light for the Venus flytrap. The Venus flytrap, it grows in nature in almost total sunlight. It has sunlight all day long. Probably to keep it best, if you're going to keep it on your windowsill, if you want to use it as a house plant, you want to keep it in a window or on a windowsill that gets a lot of sunlight. So your windows facing south are going to get the most light. Your windows facing east that get morning light, or west that gets the afternoon sun. Those are all work well. But mainly if you're going to have your fly trap in a window, you just don't want it on the north side of your house where it's never going to get direct sunlight. So I keep some of mine inside on a windowsill by a window. And next slide. These are some Venus flytraps. Maybe what I wanted to show you here was just kind of the ages. If you start on the bottom right, that little flytrap there is about a year old. The next one over in the red pot's 2 years old. The next one on the left there is about 3 years old, and the one in the back is about 4 years old. You can see how they spread through time, and also because these are traps that stay outside, they get lots of nitrogen by eating a lot of bugs. So that really causes them to spread. If you keep a single Venus flytrap in your house, it's probably not going to spread as much or grow as much because it's probably not going to catch as many insects and get as much nitrogen. But they'll do just fine in your house, really, if you don't even feed them, if you don't give them any extra food. The other thing I wanted to show you with this picture was just, I told you to always make sure they're sitting in water. And I wanted you to ask me why these aren't sitting in water. And that's because periodically I take all my carnivorous plants when it's going to rain and I sit them outside and get rid of their trays so that the rainwater can wash through the soil and clean them. I mean, not only do the plants themselves get a shower when it rains, but it also, all that water runs through the soil in the pot and washes out any possible minerals or anything that's accumulated. So just like I told you in nature, these things live where water is constantly flowing and washing away all the nutrients. You kind of want to do that periodically with your plants. Send them outside so the rain can rinse through them. And then as soon as the rain's over, I put them back in the little water trays. Okay, next slide. We're talking about sunshine and light. Yeah, it's possible to keep your fly traps outside year round in North Carolina. Now, if you have them in pots, they're probably going to get too cold on some nights in the winter. When it gets, I like to bring mine in. I don't like to have them outside if it's less than about 20, if it's 28 degrees. I usually try to bring them in if I have them in pots. But if you plant them in the ground in a bog garden, then you can leave them outside year round because the ground itself provides enough insulation around here that even when it gets down to the teens some nights or even single digits occasionally, they'll recover from that okay. The rhizomes, little roots in the bottom, won't totally hurt them. They won't get too cold. And I wanted to show you, if we could go to a live shot now, I wanted to show you one other way that you can keep fly traps. If you don't have room in the ground for a bog garden, we can set up a dish bog garden. We have one of those over here. And this is a dish that's about 13 inches in diameter, and it just has an assortment of carnivorous plants in it. You can see here in the back, there's a tall pitcher plant. This is a pale pitcher plant. Couple of the little purple pitcher plants here. You can see little Venus flytrap scattered in here. There's a sundew. There's bladderworts in here that you can't really see because they're underground right now, unless they're flowering. So this is another way you can keep your Venus flytraps or your carnivorous plants. You can keep this out on the deck or outside on a porch in the sun for most of the year. And then in the winter, when these plants need their winter dormancy, you can put them in your basement or whatever. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Okay, we go back to slides. Good. All right, we go ready for soil. Okay, that's just the picture of the bog garden. Now, soil, the key component of the soil that you use for Venus flytraps, and the ones, if you got them from the library, you'll see, is sphagnum peat moss. And this is a sort of an acidic type of moss. It's decomposed. It looks like coffee grounds. And that's the best material for Venus flytraps to grow in. And that's pretty much what they grow in naturally down toward the coast. So if you're going to repot your Venus flytrap eventually, or if you just want to know what it needs to grow in, the sphagnum peat moss is the main ingredient. The next slide is going to show you a bag of perlite. And because Venus flytraps don't like to be totally waterlogged all the time, we always want to add a little bit of something to the peat moss. So they can grow in pure peat moss. You just probably, again, want to be really careful not to let them get the water level in your dishes too high. But perlite, if you put about a fifth, so if you've got a pot, fill it up about a fifth of the way with perlite, and then that sphagnum peat moss, and it comes dry, you need to add water to it and kind of squeeze it to get the water to go into the peat moss. And fill it up the rest of the way and then mix that up. That'll be about the right amount of perlite to give you a little bit of drainage in that pot for your pot trap. And the next slide, you can also use play sand or sand. I like to use this play sand. It's washed, it's screened, it doesn't have any salt minerals in it. I usually go ahead and rinse it out one more time when I get it and use it. But you can mix it with the sphagnum peat moss at about 50-50. So you can use about half sand and half sphagnum peat moss, and that makes a really good soil for your flytraps to grow in. And that's what I use in all my bog gardens. That little dish bog garden over there is a 50-50 mixture, peat and sand. And next slide. That's just showing you mixing the perlite there with the sphagnum moss. And again, it's highly decomposed. It's real black and powdery. You want to be careful when you use this stuff because it, probably wear a mask or do this outside because that fine powder can get into your lungs and kind of irritate your lungs if you're not careful. So that's just showing you mixing that up. And if we go to the next slide, the next slide will be it's a bag of just the sphagnum moss that hasn't decomposed. And a lot of people use it for orchids. It's called orchid moss. This is something you can grow your Venus flytraps in, just straight in this. You want to just keep it wet and it comes in dry, just mix it with your rainwater, distilled water, and you can fill it up in your pot. The next slide shows you what that looks like. I mainly use this in my flytraps because your pot, all your flytrap pots need to have holes in the bottom so that they can drain and so they can pull up water from the water dish. You never want to have a flytrap in any kind of container that doesn't have holes in the bottom. So I usually use this coarser sphagnum moss to in the very bottom of my pots so that the soil doesn't wash through, doesn't come out the little holes. And also it makes a pretty good mulch if you keep your plants outside. It makes a good mulch, so when it rains, it keeps that blacker, more decomposed peat moss from splashing up on your plant, getting everything dirty. So we use that sometimes for mulch for my plants. And next slide. Nitrogen. Okay. Nitrogen is what most plants get from the ground. That's what we fertilize things. Mainly we're fertilizing to give our plants nitrogen, and everything needs nitrogen to live. But Venus flytraps, most carnivorous plants we talked about, can't get nitrogen from their environment. So they have to get it from insects, which are full of nitrogen. This is a wasp that got stuck in my Venus flytrap. It didn't get eaten, but it got its leg caught, and it was there for about 6 hours before it finally figured out how to get away. So no nitrogen from that meal. And next slide. This is one of the more unusual things I've seen my Venus flytraps catch. This was a granddaddy longlegs that got down in the trap, but he didn't get to eat the legs. The legs were all ended up sticking out. In nature, probably the main food that Venus flytraps eat are ants and spiders. They probably don't catch that many flies in the swamps, but there's a variety of things that they'll eat. And next slide. This is just to show you that this is a carcass of a bug after the flytraps worked on digesting it for a few days. Usually the traps close, and we talked about how you've got to trigger 2 of those little trigger hairs to cause the trap to close. Well, also those trigger hairs have to keep being hit to start the flow of digestive enzymes in the trap. So if you feed, like I was used to feed mine hamburger, that really doesn't do anything because the trap closes and there's no struggle. Those hairs aren't getting hit by anything. And it just sits there, and a few days later, they open back up. They don't even realize they've had a meal. So it's real important that if you want to feed your fly traps, if you're keeping them in your house and you want to give them an occasional bug or something, make sure you give them something that's alive. Because once that trap closes, you want something to be moving around in there for a little while to get that flow of digestive enzymes started. Usually when the fly traps open, and they'll open about a week to 10 days after they have a meal, rain and wind will blow out the old carcasses, but sometimes these are good because they'll attract flies. Sometimes a fly will smell something like that in a trap and land in it to eat some old bug, and that's a kind of a free meal for the fly trap. But the act of the trap closing takes a lot of energy, but to open the trap back up, it takes a lot more energy. So every time a trap closes and opens, the plant's using a lot of energy and using a lot of the nitrogen that it's caught just to be able to do that. So most of these traps wear out after about 3 times. They eat about 3 meals, and that's about all the trap can handle. It's just worn out, and you'll see them turn black and dry up, and they'll either fall off or you can trim them off if you don't like the looks of them. But that's another reason you don't want to just constantly touch the traps and have them closed, just for fun, because it really does wear the plant out over time. Okay, next slide. And this is just a bunch of Venus flytraps. I wanted to show you that the more nitrogen your Venus flytraps eat, the more they spread and create new plants. So if you've got a plant that sits in your house on your windowsill and hardly ever catches a fly, it's going to be happy and healthy and probably live a long time. It probably just isn't going to create a lot of new plants. And next slide. Okay, the most important thing, and something I didn't really know about until a few years ago when I started keeping Venus flytraps again, is how important winter dormancy is. Venus flytraps, native to North Carolina, the butterworts we talked about, sundews, a lot of these plants are used to having a really cold winter. And they need that winter rest, just like bears need to hibernate. These carnivorous plants and fly traps as well need a rest period in the winter. So if you're keeping these in your house where it's warm, then you need to find a cold place that you can put your fly traps. And we usually say about 3 to 4 months, they need to be kept cold. So typically by middle of October, at least by Halloween, you want to move them to a basement, a garage, or somewhere that's cooler than the rest of your house so that they get a chance to hibernate and rest. And then you can usually take them out around Valentine's Day, February 15th or so. Is usually long enough to let them stay cold so that they rest, and then they're able to come back and grow and be healthy again. if you don't give your plants winter dormancy, they'll probably die after about 2 to 3 years. I mean, 3 years is about the most they're going to make it if everything else is perfect. And Venus flytraps are perennial. They come back year after year. I mean, they live year after year, and they can live 20 to 30 years if everything's handled properly and if they get their winter dormancy every year. This is a little windowsill I had down in my basement, but I set a lot of my carnivorous plants. But I tend to leave mine outside year round, and I only bring them in if it's going to be down below about 28 or 27 degrees. And then I'll bring them in for a week or so until it warms back up. But they all do fine outside, even with freezing temperatures. So that's the inside little windowsill. I think the next picture is just shows you that same windowsill from the outside. It's not really important that you keep your windows that dirty. You can clean your windows and it'll be just fine. Oh, no, I'm sorry, I didn't clean that window before I took the picture. And next picture. And this is just to show you if you do everything right with your Venus flytraps, and that's one in the back in the bog garden there. You'll start about this time of year. I'm starting to see them now. You'll see the little flower stalks coming up, and you'll know that you did everything right for a year. If they're producing flowers, you know they're healthy and happy and have a lot of energy and have had plenty of nitrogen, plenty of water, and they're ready to flower and produce seeds. So the next slide. I'm going to talk just a little bit about flower stalks. And the next picture will show you that little flower stalk again coming up from the center of your Venus flytrap. That's a good way to know how many flytraps you have in a pot too, because every plant will produce a flower stalk. So if you've got a little pot and you only thought you had one Venus flytrap in there, but 3 flower stalks come up, you know you've got really 3 different plants. And this is what they look like. They grow up, little flower buds. Yeah, you go ahead to the next slide. That's fine. And then you'll see the little blooms start to open. And in the next picture, you'll see the Venus flytrap in full bloom. Now, if you read all the books, all the advice on Venus flytraps these days, they'll say, watch your Venus flytraps bloom one time and enjoy it. And then from then on, cut them off. Don't ever let them flower again. Because when they flower, they use a lot of energy. It takes a lot of energy for your plant to flower. If you've got them outside, it probably doesn't matter as much because they're getting plenty of nitrogen and a lot of bugs. But if you've got one in your house that you want to keep in your house most of the time on a windowsill, then it's probably a good idea to go ahead and cut that flower off because that's something else that uses a lot of nitrogen. So if you're only going to feed your plant occasionally, you probably want to just go ahead and cut off those flower stalks. So the next picture shows the flower stalk at about the stage you want to cut it. When it gets to be about 2 or 3 inches tall, you want to go ahead and just clip that off. And the next picture just shows the pair of scissors doing the dirty deed. Okay, just cut that little flower stalk off. But the one thing I've learned about flower stalks is you can take your flower stalks that you cut off and you can stick them in the soil and they'll grow new plants. So that next slide, you go ahead to the next slide. Fine. That's a flower stalk that I stuck beside another Venus flytrap in its pot with its little peat moss and its sand. And you can see the new little Venus flytrap forming right on the side of the flower stalk. So, I used to feel bad about cutting those flower stalks off at first. But now that I know I can get a new Venus flytrap every time I cut one off, it doesn't seem too bad. All right, and the next slide, I think that pretty much wraps up the care on the Venus flytrap. This was just a pot I was going to show you where I stuck a bunch of flower stalks in there one year, and about 2 years later, I had that mini Venus flytrap just from the flower stalks. And I think that was the last slide on care. Yeah, and that was the last slide. And I was looking at the time. I think we could either do are there many questions in the?
Yeah, we've got some questions for you, Tad.
Okay. Let's do the questions. What I was going to show you and I'll tell you about it real quick. I was going to show you how to bare root one of your Venus flytraps if you want to repot it, and they recommend that you repot them every year or 2. Or if you don't have a good wind in your house, but you want to do that winter dormancy, you can take out your Venus flytrap, wash all the soil off of it, and you want to use distilled or rainwater, so that there's nothing left but the plant, and you'll see your little leaves, and you'll see this little white thing, which is the rhizome. And you can do that in October and wrap that up in wet paper towel and put it in a Ziploc bag and put it in your refrigerator and leave it there till the end of February. And that will be your winter dormancy. And then your plant, you can replant it and it'll come back. And I was gonna bare root, but I don't think we have quite enough time. And why don't we just do some questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
Does it have to eat at all in the months? How many times does it have to eat in the week before winter dormancy?
How much does it have to eat to make sense?
Does it have to eat more than normal to have enough nutrients to last till the end of winter dormancy?
No, it doesn't. In fact, if you have one in your house, one in your house that's not catching a lot of food, not eating a lot, I mean, you might want to feed it once or twice a year, but as long as it's not producing flowers and you're it's not going to produce new plants, then it's going to be healthy, and you can take it through its winter dormancy, and it'll be just fine. Then when you take it out of winter dormancy in the spring, around February or early March, if you are going to keep it in your house, those traps that first come out aren't going to be real responsive to insects right away. But around this time, April, May, you can start feeding them a little bit if you want to. You can catch some flies or things and feed them. The more nitrogen they have, just the more energy they have to make new plants.
So one of the questions in the chat was, how long do they live? And it seems like you did answer that during your talk. Depends on how much they eat, I guess, and how often they flower.
That's correct. I mean, even if they flower, if you're feeding them, if you're keeping them outside or inside, they should last you, if you're doing everything, just meeting those basic requirements we talked about. They can live 30 or 40 years. I mean, they can live a long, long time.
And do they eat only live flies? You answered that too. They eat lots of things.
They'll eat a lot of things. This morning I caught some things to so we could feed one, and I caught that fly. But in nature, they're probably they eat more ants and spiders. But I brought little roly-polies or little sow bugs. They're easy to find out under rocks. They'll eat those. Just really any kind of insect, a little moth, butterflies, just anything you can catch like that, they'll eat and get some nutrition out of.
And you, okay, go ahead.
If the triggers are constantly being activated, will it produce digestive enzymes?
It will not. No, that's kind of a mechanism the fly trap has to not waste energy. If it's closed, if the trap closes or it gets triggered and there's nothing in there to cause it to produce the digestive enzymes, it'll open back up within a day or so, ready to try to catch something else. In fact, we think there's all those little teeth around the edges of the Venus flytrap, and it kind of looks like as it's closing, it looks like it's making a cage to hold whatever it's trying to catch in. But actually, we think the reason it does that is so little teeny things can escape through those teeth, so it doesn't waste time eating something that's really little, because it takes the same amount of energy for it to eat something big or small. So it kind of lets little teeny things escape, and then if it doesn't have anything in there, when it fully closes, it'll open back up.
Another question was, do they tolerate the colder temperatures of Catawba County? And you kind of answered that too. Although, do you bring them all inside when it's, I think you said below 28 degrees?
Yeah. It really just depends. If you have a Venus flytrap in a pot like you got from the library in the little 3-inch pot, that's probably not enough insulation in Catawba County when it gets below 25 degrees. I mean, it would probably get too cold. So, if you have them in the ground in a bog garden, you leave them outside year round. If you want to keep it outside during the winter, just keep an eye on the low temperatures predicted. And if it looks like it's going to be less than probably 30 degrees, if I just had one in a little pot, I'd probably just bring it inside and try to put it somewhere in my house that wasn't too warm. You know, again, if you have a garage or a basement that's not heated, that's ideal.
What if you
Or-
covered it with a bucket? Like if you had it planted outside?
You could do that. You could, yeah, just like you would cover other plants that you have. If you cover something with a bucket, that'll help hold, help hold heat in and keep it from getting so cold.
And I've got a question here. If they root like the slide you had up, will they live longer?
They'll live about the same. If you get that fly trap to adulthood, and it takes about 3 years for a Venus flytrap to get kind of to its full size from a seed or the little flower stalks. Once it gets to that point, that fly trap should live for 25, 30 years if it's cared for appropriately.
And how often do you feed them?
I try to keep most of my Venus flytraps outside, and they eat in the summer. By around July and August, every trap is closed almost all the time. They're just constantly eating. I do keep a few inside just for fun, just to have them to look at. And those I usually feed about once or twice a month. If I see a fly in the house and I can catch it, or when I run into something, I just give it to something.
And do we have any idea why the Venus flytrap originated in or is limited to that Cape Fear River area of North and South Carolina?
That's a good question. We really don't know. I mean, it just looks like a plant that began to grow there, and conditions were perfect and it was able to spread, but then those conditions around it were such that it could never really go anywhere else. For a long time, people used to think it was a plant that came from outer space. I mean, they said maybe a meteor came and crashed there in North Carolina, or some spaceship came. They came from another planet. But we really don't know why they only grow in that area. But just probably because of conditions, they've never been able to spread anywhere else.
And let's see, it does not tolerate brackish water, even though it grows in swamps. Is that right?
Yeah, it grows in swamps, but it doesn't grow in swamps where there's brackish water. So it can't tolerate salt at all. So the swamps are, even if you go out on some of these islands off the coast, if you start digging down into the sand, you'll run into fresh water. So even though, it seems like that water toward the coast would be kind of brackish, it's pure water in those swamps and the areas where the flytraps grow.
And what is the green stuff growing on top of the soil? Must have been in one of your pictures.
So it's the sphagnum peat moss, the one that I showed you in the bag that's not decomposed, it actually will come back to life and turn green and grow, which is kind of cool. It looks good. But I don't know, you may have seen a picture, depending on, I'm not sure which one, but sometimes algae grows on the top of them because they stay wet all the time. There's different mosses, any kind of little plants. In fact, I have some with butterworts that grow in with my Venus flytraps because they've spread and the conditions are right, and they just start growing there. So, if it starts to look like it's kind of mossy or algae, then I'll try to clean them up a little bit and pull that off. But it really doesn't hurt anything.
Do they eat dead insects or only live insects?
The trap will close on a dead insect, but it won't produce digestive enzymes, and they won't get any nutrition from a dead insect. So, I mean, even in nature, probably occasionally a dead insect or something drops into a trap. They'll close if 2 of those little trigger hairs get activated, but they won't produce those digestive enzymes, and within a day or so, that trap will open back up.
But it might attract ants or something if it had a dead insect in it.
Sure, yeah, if it opens back up and there's a dead insect, a lot of times a dead insect will attract flies or other types of insects. So that may help the Venus flytrap out, make it a little more attractive to something.
Let's see if there's any other questions. Should we put the one from the library in a bigger pot now or wait until it grows bigger?
You can wait till it grows bigger. The ones from the library are, that little pot should hold those for about 2 years. And then, probably next year it should be fine. Year after that, you might want to repot it and you can put it in a slightly bigger pot. Or if you want to start cutting off flower, if you're starting to get flower stalks and you want to add a few more fly traps to your pot, you could get a bigger pot and just start sticking the little flower stalks around it. And, within the next couple of years, you might have 5 or 6 or 7 fly traps in that pot.
And there's several questions about what is the best food for the Venus flytrap, or what are the many things, what all can it eat? Any kind of spider or insect?
Any kind of, spiders or insects for the most part. I'm sure occasionally there's little tiny frogs and things that get eaten by fly traps. Anything that's small enough. Usually I'm asked if they eat mosquitoes. Well, mosquitoes are really attractive to blood. I mean, they're out for blood. So you're probably not going to get mosquitoes in your trap, but if you slap a mosquito and it's still moving around a little bit, you drop it in a trap, it would close and, probably get some nutrition from that. But anything small.
How big will the library plants get? And is there any insect that it cannot eat?
There's really not any insect that it can't eat. Those traps will get, if you keep them in the sun, if you make sure they get 6 to 8 hours of sun every day, you give them a little bit of nitrogen, through feeding them insects, you keep them in water, all those things. Right now, most of those traps, fly traps that you got are coming out of winter dormancy. So, they're not huge plants, but, you wait another 3 or 4 months, you're probably going to have plants that have a couple of dozen traps on it. And, if you keep them in the sunshine, those traps turn red too. That's usually where that red color comes from. The more sunshine they get, the redder those little traps are. But you're going to have pretty good sized plants by August or September. And you'll see a lot of new traps coming out constantly.
I'm going to go ahead and Tad, just thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording here, but we can go ahead and do a few more questions if you have the time.
Okay, sure. Yeah. As many as you have, we'll try to answer.